Greetings everyone, Pernak here, and welcome to another episode of Printing with Matt Pernak. Up until this point, I've done pretty much linoleum and my paper school videos. Now I want to do something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about monotypes today. I'm going to do a monotype with everyone and show you how it's typically done. First, let's look at what a monotype is. A monotype is literally mono one. One print is what you get from this. Now typically you will hear some people also say, what about a ghost print? Ghost print is just a faded version of the first print that you make. Because of what we're doing, you only get one print off of this. Like I said, you can get a ghost print or a second print. It does happen. You can do that. So first off, when I do monoprinting, this type of monoprinting that I'm doing, I call it painterly monoprinting. Mostly because I'm painting. Literally painting everything. And this type of monoprinting is very popular with painters, oil painters, acrylic painters, and such like that, because it acts more like painting than it does like regular printmaking, where you carve something or you etch something, you engrave something, you scratch something, and all these other types of monoprinting or other types of printing that you are familiar with. This is monoprinting, so it's done a little bit differently. And so it's done in a more painterly effect. So that's why I call it painterly monotype. So let's kind of dive into what we're going to be doing today. Since I said it's painterly monotype is what we're doing, you will need some supplies. Most of them aren't too hard to get a hold of. First one you're going to need is a sheet of plexiglass, or I'm using Lexan. It's also called polycarbonate. It has a more colloquial name that some people may realize, bulletproof glass. Of course, this is not bulletproof at this thickness. It needs to be much thicker. Also, you are going to need a palette, because, like I said, this is painterly monotype, so you need to treat it like a paint. So I will be using my tempered glass palette that I use for pretty much everything. Now, you can also use tempered glass for your printing plate. I do not recommend regular glass, especially if you're going to put it through a press. You don't need to put it through a press, but regular glass will crack. It needs to be tempered. It needs to be pretty decently thick if you use glass for the printing plate. That's why I went with polycarbonate. It's strong, it's lightweight, and it works well. Next, you will also need a choice of paper. I will be using my Strathmore 300 right here. I like this stuff. Works very well. And then you will also need your choice of ink. You don't want to use paints, so acrylics are out and your oils are out, because oils just will not work properly. If people have tried this with oils, it just doesn't work as well. So I'm going to be using my standard water-soluble oil inks from Speedball and Daniel Smith. And if you have inks at home and you have regular oil-based inks, those will also work. Akua also works very well. You want something that isn't going to dry out very quickly. You will also need some form of medium. I'm using transparent printmaking medium. So the Daniel Smith transparent relief ink medium. Speedball makes one. A lot of companies make these mediums. You can find it in anything you're using, from etching inks to relief inks and in between. We'll also need palette knives. I got a palette knife and an ink knife. I'm going to use both. And an assortment of brushes. And you typically want to try and use brushes that are made for oil painting or acrylic painting, because they're a little stiffer. Watercolor brushes, like this one right here, which has the gold Taklon, they typically tend to be softer bristles, so they flex more. They don't give you the control you want, which actually may not be a bad thing in this, because you do have to thin down your inks quite a bit in order to make them work. You will also need I've got my water bucket here. You'll need that. And finally, one of the last things is a rolling pin. I actually find this very helpful for using with monoprints. Unless you're using a press, then you don't need a rolling pin. So I'm going to work on this upside down for you guys. So it's going to look a little funny because it's easier to show it at this angle. So I got my Lexan here, and I'm going to clean it off because I don't want anything on this to affect my print. I'm just going to clean it off with some Windex. Right there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select an image to work from and make a drawing of it, and which I've already done here, as you can see. This will be the one I'm going to do. Right here. Owl. I'm going to do a face of an owl. And what I do is I make sure my paper is a little bit smaller than my Lexan, and I set it down, and I set the glass on the Lexan on top of it. And I got some things underneath, of course. They're sticking to this. That'll be fine. Like so. That way I see what I'm working on, and kind of like I'm tracing it in a way. Then, since I'm going to be working in full color for this, now if you're working in one color, you can only use one color of ink. But I'm going to use the full gamut of colors. Your whole red, yellows, blues, so, and black and whites and everything. So what I'm going to do is let's transfer this over here to my glass palette. It's a little bit of an angle here. And this is my glass palette here. So I'm going to go ahead and put some ink onto this glass palette. And since I'm working in full color, I want to work with a certain select amount of colors. So I'm going to use quinacridone red because it's the closest I'm going to get to an actual magenta. And I like quinacridone red. It's a very, very, very nice color. And since the quinacridone, it's pretty strong, so I don't need to take a whole lot of it. So I'm not going to. I'm treating this more like I would with painting. Let's move this a little bit up, huh? That's a little better, right? So I got my red right there. I'm going to use Hansa Yellow Light for my yellow. Make sure I clean this off really well, because I don't want any red ink in my yellow ink. And because yellow is a very light color, I'm going to use a little bit more of it than I would some of my other colors. Just a little bit more. I don't need a whole lot. And quinacridones are really strong tinting. Their pigments are really strong, so it doesn't take much to tint. If I use some yellow and add some that red to it, it's not going to take much of the red to turn it orange. So I'm going to be very careful with that. And then also I'm going to use phthalo blue green shade, which is the PB15 pigment. And I'm using the green shade because it's the closest you're going to get to cyan. And phthalo is also very strong, so I'm just going to use a tiny bit of it. I don't need a lot. And then I've got my black, which I'm going to put a little bit up in the corner here. I don't use a lot of black, but I know I will be using it on this print. because I've seen what color this owl is and it's got black in them, so I will be using black. I actually like to mix my own black using, when I'm oil painting, I'll use the quinacridone red and phthalo green yellow shade. You mix those together and they get a great color of black. Also, I'm going to use some white here. And I'm not using white. I'm using white as more of a tinter. I'm not going to actually use that. Okay, let's see here. There you go. You can see that. I'm going to use it as more something I'm using to tint my colors and lighten them, as opposed to something I'm using to cover and, you know, paint over, because there's no point to it with this. I'm also going to take some transparent medium. I'm going to need this. Oh boy. Right there. I'm going to put a good healthy dose of that in there. I had to go and get some water, because I will need water. The transparent medium is going to be my medium that I'm using as painting, because like I said, I'm treating this like traditional oil painting, so I do need to use this. And then I got to use some water to help thin down the inks even more, because unlike painting, when you go to put layer on layer upon layer, and you know, it builds up and you get a little texture with the painting, you can't do that with monoprinting, because the moment you do start to try and build up texture like that from the paint itself, it squishes and then splays out, and then you've ruined your image. So you can't paint real thickly with this stuff. Now originally I said I was going to work on this upside down so you guys could see the image really well. I discovered that I think mixing the inks is also very important to show you how I do that. So I wanted you to see that also. I'll do a little bit of painting on this and then I'll switch it back to the other version, but I just want to show you me mixing as I'm doing this. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow here in my paintbrush. And this is just a really cheap, inexpensive paintbrush I got. It's a gold Taklon, which typically gold Taklons tend to be used a little bit more for, why would I say they're used more for? Watercolor, because they're a little bit softer than white Taklon. I'm just going to grab a little bit of my medium right here. Put it right there, and I'm going to dip my brush in some water and put it on here. Then I'm just going to use my palette knife to kind of mix it all up. I may have used too much water, we'll find out. Because I went through and did a couple of monoprints, because I hadn't done them in quite a while to get used to doing it before I made this video for everyone. And I made mistakes, and I did not want to show each and every mistake, but one of the ones I learned was don't paint too thickly, and that was part of the problem. I was painting too thickly with everything, and I had put a few things in that I didn't want, or I painted too thickly on a few areas, and it all splashed out, which I wasn't really that happy about. I tried to treat it more like painting than I did a print, because then I made things too thick, and I also thought, oh, I'll just use some white on top of all this just to cover it up, so make it white, and I discovered that's the wrong way of going about it also. So if you want white, the best thing to do is to scrape away the ink right here and leave the white of the paper. That's the best way of doing it. And like I said, you don't want to have this be too thick. So you do want it to be a little thin, because you got to use pressure to do these. I'm just going to paint the eyes here. And I'll do this with everything that I do, right there. So So I got my eyes painted on there. And I actually want to mix a color. I want to mix this, it's like a rusty orange color here. So I'm going to try attempting to do that here on camera. I'm going to take some yellow right here. Take some of my quinacridone red. I'm not going to use a lot because, like I said, it doesn't take much. I'm going to make it orange. And you saw how little red I used, and it made this very, 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 very bright orange, which means I would have to use more yellow. Like I said, quinacridones are very strong tinters. They're near second in strength, in my opinion, to phthalos. Both of which I have on this palette, quinacridone red and a phthalo. So they're both very strong tinting, especially compared to the yellow right there. Alright, so I got this good orange that I like right here, as you can see. And there's two things you can do. You can try and use the rule of complementaries. So if you use orange, you use blue, and it should neutral that out. I'm going to try attempting a little bit of black and seeing what we get from that. And that's a lot of black. It's probably going to make this more green. It's a lot of black. That did not turn out well, did it? It's kind of a greenish dark color right here. And I can see that, and I'm not too happy with it. But there's one thing you always forget about when I'm doing this, and that's to add white. So we're going to add some white to it and see how that lightens it up. It's going to make it, it's turning it into a gray. Which actually, I like this tone, and I can use this in the image, so I'm going to keep it. Grab some of my transparent medium, mix it into that. Yeah, I really like that kind of green gray color. It looks really nice. Take a little bit of water, mix that in there, and then I'm going to mix my, I want to mix this brown and I want to get it right. That's a much better consistency. So in order to do that, I'm going to take some more yellow again. Yellow is thick. Tiny bit of red. You can barely see the amount of red on there. Maybe a little bit more. And typically when you have things like this, especially orange, and you're trying to mix browns, some colors work better than others to make browns. I find that using purples and oranges can work very well. I'm just going to take a little bit of this blue and mix it in, and it's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. Just turning green, of course. So, it's really not that bad. It might work really well. Take some of this yellow, or white, I should say. Which, oddly enough, is starting to look kind of brownish. So it means I need to use more yellow. So I'm just going to add some more yellow into it right here. A little too much yellow. Let's add a little bit more red into it. Alright. I'm going to go ahead and mix this because I could spend 20 minutes mixing a color and talking about mixing a color. So I'm going to go ahead and mix it and get it the right tone. So I've gone ahead and I've mixed the colors that I'm pretty much going to use for this. And let's switch back to the other view so you guys can just see me, so everyone can just see me painting this. Alright everyone, so we have our monoprint all painted up. And some of it's starting to get a little sticky and tacky and dry, and that's fine. But I'm going to remove my original drawing here because I don't need this anymore. And there are a few things that you can do. I've gotten one of these color shapers right here. They're good for removing things. So there are a few things that I'm going to do here just to finish this off. You can do this with a brush too. Oop, got some water on there. Don't want to do that. So So that's not working as well as I was hoping to remove things from it. Sometimes it's just easier to use a small little brush that's been dipped in water so the bristles are just slightly wet like this. Basically, I'm just removing this to put some highlight into the eye. Because it was the one thing I forgot to do. There we go. But now that I've got this done, and you can see some of these things don't look like they're very dark compared to my original drawing. My original drawing was just kind of a quick sketch to kind of show where everything will go. So then I'm going to take my paper, and I'm using the Strathmore 300 like I said, and I have soaked it using my standard typical soaking method, which is basically running it under the water until it went limp, and then squeegeeing the water off with a squeegee, and then damping it down with a dry towel. And I can feel this paper is already pretty dry. So I'm just going to set it down right like this, right on top. Now, if you want to, you can use a Baron to do this, but a Cooler actually makes something they call a pin press. Essentially, it's just a really big, heavy, fancy rolling pin, which is what I'm going to use. I'm just going to move it back and forth and hoping that it's going to work. And I'm putting a lot of pressure on this, believe it or not. Because the paper felt a little dry. And you can test your prints like this. I didn't really get to this edge now, did I? I'm just really worried that this isn't going to print. Because the last few that I've been doing have turned out great, but my paper is a little dry. And dry paper doesn't really print all that well. Alright, as you can see here, here's our print. Alright, now I ran out and I re-wet my paper again, so this one's pretty juicy. It's got a lot of water on it. And I'm going to put this down for our ghost print. And I can see the water in here. Just going to run it back and forth like this. Oh! Paper stuck to the print, or the rolling pin. Probably because there's too much water on there. And I'm just going to keep moving in the same direction. Now if I wanted to, I can go this way too. Doesn't really help, but I'm going to do it anyways. And as you can see, there's my ghost print. Now if I really wanted to, I could probably do a third one, because there's still imagery here, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave it as it is and call it done for this print. I'm just going to make sure I clean this off with some Windex, get everything going. And my inks, which you can see over here, I would either clean them up or try and save them and reuse them. I would put them in a pallet, seal them up, and stick them in the fridge, and that will help them stay better. Well everyone, that is your basic simple mono printing. I will do a few other how-tos on mono printing here too, because I want to get into a little bit of everything when it comes to printmaking. I'm going to do a few different types. I'm going to cover a few different other materials. Like I said, this one I was using the standard typical oil-based ink or water-soluble oil-based ink. Now, what are a few things we can take away from this? A, this ink does tend to get a little dry and pasty. I wouldn't say pasty, but it does tend to get kind of tacky. And once you've applied it to the print here, you know, you can see that little ghost on here. Once you've applied it to your plate, it's, especially if you use water with it. If you use water with the water-soluble oils, it will get tacky really quickly because that water does evaporate out. And it does cause a problem, but it's not that much of a problem. But it does, if you try to touch something up with it, it becomes very difficult to do so. So you need to wipe it off and start all over. Well, everyone, that's everything. I want to thank you for watching, following along with me on my printmaking journey. Remember, always give me a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to me down below. You can also follow me on my Twitter, my Instagram, and my Tumblr. And if you want to support me, you can always purchase a print from me on my Etsy shop. All the links for everything are down below. Until next time, everyone. Bye.